So now that I've spoken about both Monster Hunter Rise as well as Monster Hunter Stories very quickly, let's now take a deep dive into Monster Hunter Rise in terms of the gameplay elements that we can expect for this particular title. Hey everyone, Pinoy X here once again, back with another Monster Hunter video. So I want to explore some of the gameplay elements that Capcom has introduced with Monster Hunter Rise just to get a better understanding of them based on the Nintendo Direct and the trailer that's provided for this particular title. Now the first thing I want to talk about here is the freeform movement that they have in comparison to previous Monster Hunter games. Movement in Monster Hunter Rise is ridiculous, but not only that, the vertical movement and horizontal movement have been evolved to the point that you can actually explore the entire locale both horizontally and vertically without any limitations or getting blocked by certain obstacles. In previous Monster Hunter games, you could usually climb on certain areas, but that was pretty much it. You were limited to where you can actually climb up in order for you to explore the locales. With Monster Hunter Rise, they actually removed those limitations by allowing you to scale walls, scale mountains, use the WIREBUG to go through gigantic gaps between certain areas, so on and so forth. So exploration is one of the key things in Monster Hunter Rise when you're going through certain locales and trying to find certain areas where you might start gathering stuff or find certain monsters. This is definitely one of the bigger things out there for Monster Hunter Rise in comparison to previous Monster Hunter games because of the fact that there's no limitation, at least in my opinion, when it comes to the exploration of the different locales within this particular title. Now, as we're going through the freeform movement in Monster Hunter Rise, one of the key things that Capcom introduced to the series is the WIREBUG. This is essentially the evolution of the Clutch Claw in my opinion from Monster Hunter World Iceborne, in that you don't need to latch onto a monster in order for you to utilize it, and you don't need to have certain elements like the Wedge Bug in order for you to traverse certain areas in the locales that you are hunting. The WIREBUG is free to explore and to fly around as long as they're close to a hunter, and you can keep latching onto them repeatedly in order for you to gain some serious movement in this game. One of the best things about the WIREBUG in my opinion as well is that because of the fact that it's freeform in comparison to the Clutch Claw, you can use a lot more varied attack patterns in comparison to the Clutch Claw when using the WIREBUG in combination with your weapon type. We can actually see a number of these examples in the trailer as well as in the Direct, where some of the weapon types were actually utilizing the WIREBUGs in various different ways. The best one in my opinion has to be the Sword and Shield, because the Sword and Shield hunter just latches the WIREBUG onto the sword and starts flailing it around like a mace or something like that, and that was a ridiculous AoE attack that looks super awesome that could only be done with the WIREBUG in Monster Hunter Rise. This is not something that we can do in Iceborne at this moment in time, although it could make sense if they could do it with the Clutch Claw. So overall, the WIREBUG is definitely an evolution of a system that we are familiar with, especially if you're a hunters who started with Monster Hunter World and Iceborne. Moving on from the WIREBUG, let's now take a look at a new companion that we are gonna have in Monster Hunter Rise alongside our Palico. This is none other than the PALAMUTE. Now the PALAMUTE is actually something that Capcom created for Monster Hunter Generations originally, however they scrapped the idea. In Monster Hunter Rise, however, this idea was resurrected in the same manner as that of the Palico system, meaning that it's no longer considered as a weapon type, but rather as an independent companion. Now when we take a look at the PALAMUTE and the Palico at the same time, you can actually bring them both into a hunt, meaning that you can have a combination of your canine companion and your feline companion as you're going through and fighting certain monsters. Now both of these creatures can be brought into the battlefield and they will have different focuses for you. For the Palamutes, they're mostly focused on attacking the monster, being offensive in terms of combat, whereas the Palicos at this point will actually focus more on supporting you, being defensive in terms of gameplay. So you can have a combination of two Palamutes for a pure offensive combat, or two Palicos for pure defensive combat, or a combination of both in order for you to balance them out. Finally, you can customize the Palamute in the same manner as that of the Palico, meaning that you can make them look as unique as possible to suit your own personal style with regards to your canine companion. Now, going back to the subject of freeform movement or freedom of movement, however you want to say it, I gotta talk about the locale design very quickly, especially for the one that they previewed during the direct. Shrine Ruins actually has a lot of open spaces on it in comparison to the locales that we have between World and Iceborne, at least in my opinion. One of the main gripes that I had with Monster Hunter World Iceborne is that a lot of the locales had these small compact spaces and large monsters inside them that made it really difficult for you to really maneuver your character in, especially when you're trying to get a good position to try and hit the monster in. In Monster Hunter Rise, it seems like they went back to the original concept of some of the locales from previous Monster Hunter games, where there's a lot of open spaces for you in order to really maneuver your character and get a proper positioning. With the combat being so fast-paced, with the WIREBUG being one of your main tools in order to hunt down monsters, it's no wonder why there's plenty of open spaces when you're going to be hunting down monsters on this particular locale in Monster Hunter Rise. Now, that's not to say that all locales are going to be designed like this, but hopefully it does mean that Capcom has learned that small spaces can really impact gameplay, especially for a game like Monster Hunter. With the idea of the locales being about as large as the ones that we have seen in World and Iceborne and having plenty of open spaces, if you really want to traverse them without getting tired constantly or using the WIREBUGs, you can use your Palamute as a mount, similar to the Raider Riders back in Iceborne, in order for you to traverse them without getting tired. And of course, with the Palamutes acting like Raider Riders, you can also use things like potions and well-done stakes as you're riding them. So exploration really is one of the key things that they're going for here, at least from my opinion, with regards to some of the locales and the movement that you can do with these locales throughout Monster Hunter Rise. Hopefully this is something that goes on with future Monster Hunter games as well, because that freedom of exploration is one of the key things that I really love about the Monster Hunter series. You can just appreciate the amount of work that they've done with some of the environments that they've created throughout the years throughout Monster Hunter. Now, we can't talk about Monster Hunter without taking a look at some of the weapon types that they have presented to us. For the most part, they've shown us most of the weapon types that we know from previous Monster Hunter games, such as the bow, the charge blade, the switch axe, the longsword, great sword, and I believe this is the lance, and for the most part, these are weapons that we are all familiar with. However, with the introduction of the WIREBUG, it does mean that the controls may be different in comparison to what we are used to in Iceborne, especially if you're used to using the Clutch Claw. So just keep that in mind. There are going to be some alterations for gameplay with regards to the controls in order to incorporate the new WIREBUG system. Having said this, I also want to know if Capcom are planning to give us a new weapon type for Monster Hunter Rise. Now, at this moment in time, there is no information on that, but I would like them to surprise us as of next week with Tokyo Game Show, where they show us all of a sudden that there is a new weapon type for the game. They don't necessarily have to do it, but it would be super awesome if they can introduce a new weapon type for Monster Hunter Rise. The final gameplay element that I want to look into very quickly is one that revolves around monsters. The monsters themselves I'm going to cover in a separate video because I want to go more in depth with them, but the gameplay element that we're looking at here is none other than turf wars. Now, they did show us a preview of a turf war between Arzuros and the Tetranodon, and for the most part, it seems like Tetranodon was trying to swallow up the Arzuros and just couldn't do it quite yet. Having said this, however, they did mention that there are going to be some gameplay elements that actually revolve around turf wars. Not quite sure what they meant by that. Maybe there's going to be changes in the monster or the environment whenever two creatures interact, but for the most part, it would be fascinating how they are going to evolve the turf wars between monsters in Monster Hunter Rise from Monster Hunter World Iceborne. So hopefully we get more information of that as of Tokyo Game Show next week, and more information possibly on the weapon types as well. But that's pretty much all of the information that we have so far regarding the gameplay elements of Monster Hunter Rise coming up for the Nintendo Switch. And that, everyone, is pretty much it for this video, taking a look at some of the gameplay elements that Capcom has presented to us during the Nintendo Direct for Monster Hunter Rise. Now, at the end of the day, this information may well change as they progress through the release date, or they could reveal some more information that we have not known about regarding some of these gameplay elements maybe around next week again during the Tokyo Game Show. But with all of that being said, what do you think about these gameplay elements being introduced in Monster Hunter Rise? Let us know in the comments below what you think about these gameplay elements for this new title coming up for the Nintendo Switch. And with all of that being said, if you enjoyed these videos, please consider leaving a like on the video itself and subscribing to the channel, as well as hitting that bell icon so you can go ahead and catch up on any future Monster Hunter content that I might be doing or any other games that I might be playing in future. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Onward and upward.